In 2015, Sig Sauer came into Shotshow and showed their new rifle known as the MCX, mainly the MCX Legacy. It started off as the short-stroke gas piston-driven system that relies on everything inside the upper receiver. What made it really a big deal was the short stroke and capability that it was made to make into a multi-caliber system. From going from 5.56 to swap change to 300 blackout like that. It was a very modular rifle that was used basically all around the world in today's modern special forces. So, why don't we make this week's episode very special, because this week is my birthday. Let's talk about something that replaced my own favorite, the 416, and talk about the new MCX, and for the airsoft variant, by Sig Air. Hey, what's up guys, and welcome back to another episode of Airsoft Master. And today we're going to be talking about something special during this time is the MCX, something that I kind of been collecting for quite some time, and at a point where these were really good rifles in the airsoft variant and the real steel types. We're going to talk about like how modular these things can be, and at the same time, the same thing can be said about the airsoft variant for the AEG, or if you're lucky enough to get one, is the gas blowback variants. But don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and comment down below is what do you guys have done to your MCXs, or drop a comment down below. What do you have customized out of it, or what do you like about the MCX? And if you're looking for like an MCX for yourself, like the AEG, that's easy to get, do check us out at airsoftmaster.com. But for now, let's go ahead and get into the video. So in 2015, Sig Sauer in New Hampshire, USA, has produced their first generation of the MCX known as the Legacy. In fact, I'll put a photo right up here what it looks like. Everybody is well known for it is the Keymon handguard system, and what made it different in comparison to most of other rifles was the short stroke gas piston driven system that was inside the upper receiver. And one thing that was also interesting was how modular that gun was when even changing handguards, in the fact that it was a lot quicker than we expected to see. Now, we fast forward, and a couple things that airsofters would see is that they would like to replicate mainly the gun inside a very well-known special forces group, or shall I say, more of a metropolitan department. If you're wondering what I'm talking about in good old UK, the CTSFO stands for Counter-Terrorist Special Firearms Officer. And those guys look like this. And I gotta admit, the drip with being in gray all the way through with a gray MCX is super mint. And you have to admit, this is what actually led to, in fact, that when we fast forward from that to 2019 in Clean House, in Call of Duty, yes, the gun was well known as well as being part of it in the Special Forces and seen used during that time in Call of Duty. Specifically the MCX with the Rattler build. Something kind of like this, but in the grayer version. And it was a lot more cleaner, I have to admit. We keep continuing from there is, for the airsoft, we did see the Legacy did come out. But in the second generation, what we did notice is when the Virtus did come out around 2019. As for me, when that rifle did come out, not only I bought it once, not twice, but 3 times, just to show how much of a really good rifle it can be. I picked one to be as a normal MCX when I first came out, and then I decided to make it into an LVAW like this. I made a tan one into a DMR, and I made the regular one into more of the spear, which sadly that went away, but in good reason. But the situation is with the MCX is it's a very well modular system. Same thing can be said about the airsoft. Now let's go ahead and work our way from the front to the back of the rifle as we did with the AEGs and down the gas blowbacks of what I did with these builds. and basically move on to why I actually think these are a really good system. So why don't we start off with these two rifles right in front of me? Well, you'll see is the variation of the LVAW. And what I did is take the spear and made it into a rattler, so I call it the spear rattler. In front of them, you'll see is the original Sig Sauer suppressors. Now, underneath this one, which is the AEG variant, I do have as well as the original suppressor, but in the AEG variant where there's no extended inner barrel. One thing I do like about that is underneath the stock one, which I'll show you here, this one is a 14mm negative. So if you want to put any other flash hiders, tracer units, or suppressors, you can do so. And if need be, if you want to make this either the Rattler version, you also can do so by going to get the Lilacs conversion kit, which looks like this. As it's close enough for an AEG to still fit a good battery size, yet still be close enough to look like the Rattler. So it is possible. Now, behind that, you do end up with also the stock handguard that's in the version 2 or the Gen 2s of the Virtus would have is this stock M-Lock system where you can change this out to have a sling mount in the back. You do have that 20mm Picatinny on top with 3, 6, and 9 for the M-Lock slots all the way through. For me, I wanted to be unique, so I decided to do is the LVAW build out here with the handguard. So the good news is about this, it's a lot more slimmer, and also with the width of the handguard being a lot more wider, I was able to make it more integrated for the suppressor originally on the handguard and the gun overall. It's a lot more fine-tuned, and one thing I do like about the handguard, you don't really need a foregrip, as this is a perfect fitment all the way through to keep yourself stable, yet still comfortable enough to cut through if you need be. Now, what's interesting about the all the way back from the handguard to the end of the upper receiver, you do have a monolithic rail system that goes all the way through until you hit the bridge of the rail for your 12 o'clock positions. So you do have so much real estate, such as if you want to put a red dot magnifier or just a simple red dot and a backup sights in the back, or even possibly wanting to make a DMR build like the SPR like I did in the Modern Warfare 3 countdown. Again, the modularity is there for the MCX. Now, for speaking about modularity and mainly on the handguard, one thing I can concur that I do like about this is how easy to change the handguard is on the AEG variant. Simply just push out the body pin for the front all the way throughout, and then slowly tug your handguard out of the receiver. This will reveal the front wire system from the Avalon gearbox that's inside the Sig Sauer MCX. Now, I got to admit, that is one little drawback is front wire systems where you have to be careful about feeding it through when it comes to dealing with either installing new MOSFETs or just replacing the wires on these gearboxes. But the one thing I will admit though that Sig Air did in regards of the receiver is it's not as noticeable for the battery once you put like attachments on your different types of handguards. And one thing I have to admit with this, it does a very good job when it comes to keeping everything slim where it's not as noticeable. And I do have to give credit is, for one thing, is when you have is the original gas block system, or make it shorter depending on the situation is, no matter what, they have enough space to put an 11.1 LiPo battery, such as the 1100s, buffer types that you can't fit inside right in the between the receiver and the barrel. Again, good job on that, Sig Air. Now that we already talked about the upper and basically the handguard system of how modular it can be, let's go ahead and move on to the receiver. Where a couple things you're going to see for the trademarks is on the receivers you're going to end up with is the Sig Sauer insignia, and at the same time basically showing the same licensing that is produced in New Hampshire of the United States, good old USA, and also the multi-caliber system on here with the nameplate as the Virtus for the Gen 2. Now, hopefully Sig Air is nice enough to make an AEG variant where we're probably going to see down the road is the Spear as the Gen 3 of the MCX. where the spears will have nothing on their nameplate. So, would be nice to see that for an AEG. Hint, hint, SIG. Give me a call on your airsoft stuff. Either way, what's nice about this is you still have your standard AR controls with a couple ambidextrous parts, mainly your selector, being safe, semi, full auto, an actual bolt catch that works for the Virtus on the Gen 2 on the left-hand side, and ambidextrous magazine release. Now for the bolt catch, sorry lefties, it's still going to be on the left-hand side paddle. Hopefully, maybe when we see the spear on the AEG, we will see the original ambidextrous bolt catch like we do on the gas blowback version, right here. Again, it would be very nice to see that. And now let's move on to the AEG internals for the MCX. Surprisingly enough, it's a version 2 gearbox with the Avalon series like we would see out there. You'll still have as your 18K motor with normal 18-1 gear sets and alongside their polymer piston head from the Avalon series with their integrated MOSFET system in the front wire in the front and then also inside the gearbox shell alongside with the trigger control system inside that is a normal contact in there. Surprisingly enough, what I did on this gun in comparison to the other MCXs I've done was change it out for a Gate Titan. Surprisingly with this one, it still survives with the stock MOSFETs. And I'm surprised because I'm using 13-1 gear sets in this thing alongside with a 22 high torque motor. So it lives. It's pretty good and it's still durable. So good job, VFC, on the internals. Now, I did change out also another thing I did was the SHS piston head and piston, or shall I say the 14-tooth piston body with an ASG piston head inside. That does help me out with a lot more better compression on there, which we'll go ahead and chrono on the AEG part with this Virtus on the LVAW. One positive thing that I do love about the AEG on the Virtus versions is if we look in the gearbox, it is a quick change spring system. Can be easily changed as soon as we remove the stock. There is an Allen key in the back end of the receiver to easily change it out from going from indoor outdoor by just using the Allen key to remove the spring from the back where the 1913 adapter is at. Now that we already talked about the internals, let's go ahead and move on to where's the hop up on the AEG version. For the AEG, we would just have to pull the charging handle back and it would reveal the stock rotary style VFC hop up system in there, which surprisingly enough, I didn't need to change. On this one, it was very good. It's still fine tuned, where even I put 3 OBBs in here and it still backspins very well alongside with a upgraded 603 Type 4 barrel. I would say what I did with this one is the same length as my 416, being around the 300 millimeters at a 603 Type bore. Now for bucking wise, I'd use is the Rio Kotsu flat hop buckings. For this one, I went with a hard because I go either from 2.5 and above on my BBs. Now for modularity in the back end of the stock. For example, now original one, it would come with is this PDW style, which we've seen on the real MPX or sometimes on the MCX PDWs like we've seen on the CTSFOs. Again, it's a very nice brace system which is very sturdy, and at the same time you have as a sling loop in the back end, or if you want to do a 2-point sling, you also have as a sling loop attachments here for your QD sling mounts. Like for me, surprisingly enough, when I did purchase this gun, there was no 1913 stock out there except for the real Sig Sauer ones. Thankfully enough, the time has changed and now Airsoft is somewhere out there available to change out the stock for the original Sig Sauer 1913 stock adapter like I've done here. So if I wanted to use a PDW, it is easy to change by just using the Allen key and picking which slot to use on the Picatinny 1913 rail adapter and going PDW or the stock. Or secretly, you can buy yourself an MPX and then swap in between. That would be very interesting. And also, you would have the best of both worlds. Now, for one thing is in regards to magazine compatibility for the AEG side, this thing does love is the normal standard EPM 1s, EPMs, or even the normal Stag-Nag style magazines, as well as the high cap magazines from the Lancer Tactical or the G&Gs. The one thing I would say is do check on is to make sure that the wire is tucked in properly in the left-hand side or right-hand side, depending on who has been either working on it or the manufacturer, to see that it's all the way tucked into the upper receiver. Because sometimes if they're too low, they can get in the way and will not lock inside the receiver where the magazine release is at. So just make sure that it's actually nice and tucked in so it would give it the proper feeding, and at the same time your magazine locks in and doesn't drop. Now let's go ahead and get to the big guys in the room, which is known as my rattler and the spear. Yes, looks like a spear, I understand that, but the difference between this guy is it started off as a rattler, but I don't have is the ambidextrous back end like the bolt catcher is supposed to be for the spear. Either way, it's a nice little conversion that I did on this guy. We'll talk about down the road, as this one is the spear, but I converted it to the rattler using the parts that was originally on from the rattler and moved it here, and was able to have is the ambidextrous bolt catch like we've seen that I talked about, where hopefully SIG Air will make an AEG variant. That would be nice. So let's go ahead and talk about working our way from the front to the back. Is we do have on here is the original flash hider for the SIG Air on the CSAW spear, and then as well to that the original suppressor with the integrated inner barrel compression for the rattler or spear on that one as well. That's kind of confusing. We'll just go for spear rattler and the CSAW spear. Make it a lot easier. So for my CSAW spear, what I did was I took the original barrel from the spear rattler and put it on here to make it more unique than the normal spear or rattler build that started off. I ended up getting somewhere from a good friend of mine is the original spear handguard, which came in black and was very handy. It did help out a lot with making it a lot more kosher, is seeing that the barrel is all the way through with the gas block, and with the help with FCAW that makes the extension to make your rattler into a Virtus extension of the receiver or a spear extension. So it does make it a lot more flush and you won't have that nasty gap in the middle. As for these internals on the VFC, they do use is a short stroke gas bolt system on here, which surprisingly enough has its own proprietary nozzle and differences of comparison to the older gen to the new gen. The older gen has the end pass system to be able to adjust how much gas you want to put in and also to increase or decrease your FPS. I wish they did the same thing for the newer gens where they don't have anything. They don't even have it on the Surge nor the new spears, which kind of questions is like, why do they do that? When the original one for the Rattler did come with an adjustable end pass system. So it did kind of confuse me about why all of a sudden the change where it did not. Again, either way, it still works out with where I can play this indoor and outdoors with in between either of these rifles. Now that we talked about the internals for the gas blowback, let's go ahead and put into the review how their trigger pull is. Starting off with the CSAW, the first gen of the gas blowbacks, the APFG, which, fun fact, this stands for a passion for guns. Again, I can see why they do that for the motto. But on to the trigger pull. This is the Rattler version. Let's see how much it takes to put pressure. Phew. Let me do that again. Okay, there's the reset, but let's go ahead and pull the trigger. Some slack, some slack, some slack. I think that's the wall. It's pretty stiff, but again, it's so close to the wall, it would just creep up. Let's go ahead and hear that reset. A little bit of slack. Oh, yeah, so it's pretty nice. And for APFG on the Rattler, for some reason, it was actually a pretty nice idea is having the flat blade trigger pull on here, which in my aspects does help out with a lot faster on the trigger response when it comes to instead of the standard traditional curved ones. But I have to admit, this did grow on me as well, so I might think about doing that on the Spear Rattler as well. So with both of the gas blowback rifles that you do see here, both of them do have is the upgrade to shout out to GSI for making the hop-up arms for the APFGs, as they do have a better surface contact tension and also a better hop-up arm to put either flat hub nubs inside and giving it the perfect backspin and contact for the bucking. Now, another important thing that I do have to say as a good upgrade is, well, the question comes up is, Mike, with a short stroke system like this, wouldn't you need something to reinforce with preventing from cracking on the lower receiver? The answer is yes. And for one company I have to give out a shout out to is Black Variable for making this buffer spacer or short stroke buffer. I don't know what to call it, but it's to help reinforce where behind this is a spring, and then from there to help reduce any type of retention or basically a lot of stress from the back end of the receiver, which is a possible chance of prone from cracking of how much power that's coming from the bolt and causing a problem where, again, for these guys in the low receivers, cause a pretty penny, which I don't want to do. Now, when we talk about modularity, we do see that as well. On the same thing can be said about the gas blowbacks with the 1913 stock adapters on both of these. For example, on the CSAW, I do have as a standard buffer tube adapter on the back end, while you can also get as a minimalistic style one like we have here on the Spear Rattler. Again, very both easy to do so by just changing it out by using the Allen key or whatever bolt that is used for Torx to put on your different stocks. Yet, they all do the same thing, and what I like about modularity is you can make it to whatever comfortability that you want to use per each rifle. I'm using 0.20 gram BBs and 11.1 LiPo battery. Not bad. And now for the CSAW Spear. One thing I do like about the Spear Rattler build is I can actually fold the stock where it is easier to chrono. But now, let's go ahead and chrono the Spear Rattler and see what FPS it shoots. Pretty consistent. So when it comes to the FPS chrono on my MCX AEG, we're looking around is the 380 to 400 FPS out the box. You can change it out for the FPS to be more indoor or indoor friendly CQB wise, is by taking out the spring, the quick change spring system by removing the stock and then changing it out to the spring that would be more convenient for your feel. As for the gas blowbacks, the Rattler will come off at around the 300 to 280 because of the short inner barrel. The same thing can be said about the LT Spear because of that picture of the inner barrel for both of them look like this. Very short. Again, if you want to change your FPS, you can extend the inner barrel like I did with the CSAW on here, and so as I did as well on the Spear Rattler, making it to be around the 400 FPS. The kicker and the interesting part about this guy here with the end pass system open all the way through, this guy can shoot 530 feet per second, which is pretty high. So be careful about exactly what you want to use it for depending on what fields or Milsim games in regards to whatever will be comfortable when you go out there and play. So what are my final thoughts on the MCX? Well, surprisingly enough with these guys is with the main purpose of the idea is modularity and multi-caliber. This comes out to be handy for any type of operator in the real world. As for the airsofter, again, you do have is the combination of changing it from hundreds and hundreds of attachments and handguards to make it your own unique MCX. So it does help out there. As for the AEG one, during the time of the recording, you're looking around as the $480 to $500 to purchase the AEG variant. As for the gas blowbacks, it's a little bit trickier since it's overseas situations, but there are some people that have it in the US out there. And that one is a little bit pricier, somewhere around the 5 or 6, as I saw on Hop-Up. Now, again, this is a very unique system to have for the MCX, and I can see why this was a replacement for the 416 on a lot of special forces like the Army side, and it changes good sometimes. And for this one, what do you guys think about the MCX? What do you think of the combinations out there? And also, if you have your MCX, how does yours look and your attachments when you put it all together? Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Drop a comment down below again. And then if you're looking for products like these, like the MCX AEG, do check us out at airsoftmaster.com. But for this episode, my name's Mike. Have a good one, guys. And of course, happy holidays.
This video is brought to you by Airsoft Master.